The Germans. Now, that's not the Germans as in the Prussians or the Austrians. That is the Germans as in the King's German Legion. King's German Legion was founded in 1803, and it was the only unified force of Germans to fight Napoleon from 1803 onwards. The Austrians and the Prussians had both made peace, been invaded and forced to the peace table. The King's German Legion, mostly from Hanover, but not always from Hanover. Hanover, for those who don't know, the British had invited the ruler of Hanover to become their king after they chopped the head off a king and then his son, and then kicked their family out for being the wrong religion, and then fought a whole bunch of wars called the Jacobite rebellions to keep that king from the throne. And then the parliament just said, we get to pick who the king is because we're just going to change the rules for no reason. And there were many Catholic officers, especially many Catholics, you weren't allowed to be a Catholic officer in the British Army actually. Parliament passed an exemption every single year, but officially you were not permitted to be a Catholic in the British Army. Practically you were. But many Scottish officers would actually drink toasts, holding their glass of whatever they were drinking over a cup of water, in toast to Prince Charlie across the ocean, the king over the ocean. Anyway, the King's German Legion. So, the King of England, the King of Great Britain, is also the elector count of Hanover. It's a title from the old Holy Roman Empire, that mess of German states. But anyway, so the Hanoverians set up the King's German Legion, and Germans flocked to this regiment. Initially, it is only open to Germans. Eventually, it is opened up to Scandinavians as well. This eventually just becomes this big. Anybody who's not pro-French, who wants to fight the French unit that the British set up, it's quite active. It never really fights as its own division. It's mostly fights in its own brigades. Everyone had to be able to speak English. A lot of the names were Christianized, or not Christianized, anglicized. So you would have Johann would become Joseph or something like that. There's a good book for the King's German Legion is Longest Afternoon. It's a very short book. It's a 3-hour audio book. It's also a physical copy as well, but I don't own the physical copy, so I can't tell you how long it is. But Longest Afternoon talks about that they go through the documents that some people have for the King's German Legion, where they list dead, missing, German word for captured, German word for injured. They actually would use a very big mix of German and English. It was the King's German Legion who defended La Haye Sainte on Waterloo. Major von Baring defended La Haye Sainte on Waterloo, which is the farmhouse, and that's La Haye Sainte there. It's in the centre at Waterloo. Major Baring did this on horseback. For the most part, he had horses shot out from under him. He had I believe I've talked in a previous video about the incident where his reins were cut. Major von Baring is a very interesting character. He had a rather disgusting injury where a bullet had gone up in there somewhere many years ago, which produced a thick viscous thing of pus that he was constantly spitting pus, and he had shattered teeth that were never removed. If anyone's ever had an infected tooth that you have to really, he was just, pus was constantly trickling down his nose, out of his ears, and he was spitting it. He was quite a gruesome sort of figure, but he was very inspirational to the men who defended La Haye Sainte. King's German Legion were also some of the troops who were sent to reinforce La Haye Sainte. They were some of the troops who were caught in line when they should be in square, thanks of course to the Prince of Orange, who ordered them to be in line where cuirassiers were around, and the cuirassiers just tore them to pieces. Oh, is that enough of a tangent? I believe I can go on a tangent here. And I'm quickly just going to look something up, because I believe it was the 28th, but I'm not 100% sure. Okay, so we're in, I'll chat to you while I'm doing this. The 28th Regiment, I'll have a bit of a chat to you. I believe it was the 28th, I'm going to double check just to be certain. It was the 28th, okay. So I'm just that good, I doubt myself constantly. So we're in Egypt, 1801 in Egypt. So Sidney Smith has just negotiated a brilliant peace deal that everyone has agreed to, which has been shredded because the British government does not wish to acknowledge that Sir Sidney Smith there is a legitimate operative of the British government. They say he's a pirate and well, not a pirate, but he's a cad who was running around just having his own private affair, which he was, but he was doing good for the service, good for the nation. So Sidney Smith, great guy. Napoleon really didn't like Sir Sidney Smith. Sir Sidney Smith had basically embarrassed Napoleon and stopped him at Acre, or Acre. He had beaten Napoleon. The siege of Acre was a complete failure. So Napoleon has then fled back to France, as you do. The treaty was originally that the French army would just leave Egypt. That was it, they would just leave. So you had a unified army under Kléber. Lineberg has a much better video on this. Basically, Kléber, the crazy hair, was a very big opponent of Napoleon's. He was an actual Republican, an actual proper French Republic. And the army was quite loyal to Kléber, so the idea was send Kléber with a unified, loyal army back to France to oppose Napoleon. And instead what the British did was they declined that and they fought the Battle of Alexandria. An opposed landing. This is one of the few opposed landings of the Napoleonic Wars. Sir Sidney Smith was in charge of, I believe, artillery. But he was famous for being a beach and assault lander. He was very much a close to the shore type of officer. He was not actually a knight. He was a Swedish knight. That's HMS Swedish Knight. My Dark Star ship is actually named after Sir Sidney Smith. That is possibly the biggest tangent I could ever think of. But anyway, the 28th. So this is how I got here. The King's German Legion force in line. I believe the second light. The second light were the ones in the La Haye Sainte. So the King's German Legion line cut to pieces. But you were not necessarily cut to pieces if you were in line. The 28th Regiment of Foot fought at Alexandria, and at Alexandria they were charged by the French cavalry. And their officer quite calmly and quite... the stories say he quite calmly. I imagine he was screaming like a maniac, and he ordered rear rank about face, and so the cavalry smashed into... That was probably horrendously loud. Sorry. The cavalry smashed into the British lines and rode straight on through. And the rear British line turned around and opened fire. And the 28th, for their valour, were actually allowed to have a badge on the rear of their shakos. So if you ever see troops with a front and rear shako badge, that is the 28th Regiment of Foot. A slight tangent, possibly a great deviant tangent, but anyway, that's the Germans, and a little bit about the Egyptian campaign. Where shall we go from here? It's quite an old book, so I believe some of the pages are sort of stuck together. It's not that enjoyable that pages will be stuck together, but it is a very good read. I would definitely recommend anybody picking it up. Leipzig, oh okay, I already talked about the artillery. I already talked about that. Generals, okay. I'm going to talk about generals and some of the big names of the Napoleonic Wars. So for the French, specifically the later part of the Napoleonic Wars, there's very, very good French generals. Kléber, who I mentioned before, was assassinated. He was killed by an Arab student. And we have a lot of very good French generals at the start of the war. General Lannes, L-A-N-N-E-S. He's the one in the video about, he's this guy here getting amputated by Baron Larrey. He dies as well. There are quite a few French generals who were killed very early on in the war. British have the same thing. Moore, M-O-O-R-E. Moore is killed at Corunna, at the retreat to Corunna. The British had originally sent an army to Spain, which had the utter tar kicked out of it by the French. They smashed this British army, which did not flee, it withdrew. The British army fought a lot of rearguard actions. At Corunna, obviously, as an example, and at Corunna, Sir John Moore was killed. And replacing him was a man who is currently on trial, or who would soon be on trial, Sir Arthur Wellesley. He beat the charges that he was accused of. I'll put them here, what they were. I can't remember off the top of my head. Picton was actually on trial around the same time for torturing slaves in the West Indies. He also beat those charges. Picton, while we're at it, Picton was killed at Waterloo. The movie Waterloo shows him being shot with a top hat. Yeah, whatever. I have no idea why they did that. Waterloo is such a great movie. I had no idea why they cartooned it up with Picton. Maybe it was a censorship thing. They didn't want to show too much blood. But Picton was either Picton was either hit by a cannon, a round shot, or he was shot with musket balls as he led his division in an attack. Picton had famously, his uniform had not arrived, so he was dressed in his dinner clothes. In the Peninsula, he was famous for fighting in a sleeping cap. You know, one of those sort of those caps you see the old-timey people putting onto bed. I don't know how you manage to sleep with those awful things on your head, but he would famously fight in that. He was instrumental in, I believe, the siege of Batahov. He was actually on the walls. At Batahov, he led his division onto the walls. And yeah, he was killed at Waterloo. Who else can we talk about? Who else was killed in action who was very, very famous? Let me just think about that. So while we're talking about Corunna, and I believe it was Corunna. Again, top of the head. We have Rifleman Plunkett, and since I don't know where else to put this, let's put it here. Rifleman Plunkett, who wrote a memoir, which is quite rare for a enlisted soldier, or a memoir was written for him by someone. I can't exactly remember which. Plunkett made a very, very long-range shot. The range of that shot is on the screen now, where he killed a French officer. He invented a sort of Plunkett pose, where he lay on his back, used his foot to wedge the sling, and made quite a long-range musket shot, which killed a French general. Plunkett was very, very famous. I believe he was in the 95th. You had two rifle regiments, the 95th and the 60th. Right, so again, back to Napoleon's campaign in miniature. Let's flick through this book. I should actually have a random number generator and just go to that page. I think I might do that for the next video, but for now, let's take a flick through the book. And what do we have here? That is generals. Let's go a few more pages. Strategy and tactics. Now, one of the big difference people talk about when they talk about the Napoleonic Wars is the French column and the British line. That's not entirely incorrect. The British were famously using lines. The first use of a big British line that proved to the British that these could work was in 1756 at the Battle of the Plains of Abraham. Boom. Where the British royally curb-stomped to utter ruin. Literally, it destroyed French control of Canada. General Montcalm was killed, the Marquis de Montcalm. General Wolfe was killed. It lasted about 20 minutes, so this is sort of like an Abu Clear time frame we're talking about. You can see Abu Clear in the description below. So it's a very short battle. The French volley early, the British wait, hold their fire. The British form a long line between two. I'm not going to talk about this because I'm going on a tangent. Essentially, the British used lines of 2 men deep, and the French used lines as well. The French used 3-man lines. So I believe it was 2 French battalions had the same width as a single British battalion. French battalions were famously smaller than British battalions. Anyway, the French preferred the column and the British preferred the line, and everyone used squares. Oh, while we're talking about the Austrians and the cannons, let's talk about Austerlitz. This video is going to be called like the king of all tangent ramble videos. But it's actually the Russians who we're talking about, not the Austrians. But the Austrians were there. They were one of the 3 emperors at Austerlitz. Battle of 3 Emperors. 1805. This is to me Napoleon's best victory. But we're not going to talk about the battle. We're going to talk about what happened after, when the Russians decided to retreat across the frozen lakes. And Napoleon, being an artillery general and a friggin' psychopath and a murderous man, had his cannons fire into the lakes, crack the ice, and drown a whole bunch of Russians. We know that Russians were drowned. The number of Russians who were drowned was, who knows. It's all over the place. This is the battle Napoleon actually fought by, this is the army, he had the Grand Armée to invade the United Kingdom, invade England. If Napoleon had actually invaded England, I've often wanted to wargame this campaign. I've got the research done for it. But this stuff involves going to be a lot of work to actually run it. Maybe I'll do it one day. But if Napoleon invades England, it's bad. He loses. He loses. Even if he wins, he loses. The Royal Navy cuts him off. He's now stuck in England when Prussia, Russia, and Austria invade. He's stuck in England with his best generals. He's in big trouble. He would probably win. He would probably win that campaign. In my scenario, he takes London and is defeated at Oxford with a combined Royal Marine and... But this is basically the Royal Navy has discovered what's happened and has shipped back Marines and sailors to supplement the forces. Britain had 500,000 men in the militia. They had dug a whole bunch of... Britain was defended. It was ready for an invasion. But basically, yeah, Napoleon, if he crosses that channel, he loses the war in 1805 before it even really starts. So good thing Napoleon did not do it. Bad for the 2 million French who were killed and the millions of other people who died because of this lunatic. But good for Napoleon, you know. I'm definitely going to have to come up with a random number generator system for this. Okay. Organization of the cavalry. Right. Okay, when we look at a cuirassier or a hussar, cuirassier wears a cuirass or a cuirass. It's a cuirass. Don't call it a cuirass. That's people who say cuirass are either French or they're trying to be really weirdly suggestive when they talk about this mustachioed gentleman here. Hussars were generally younger. They were generally, they believe there was a hussar. One of Napoleon's famous hussar generals basically said, any hussar who lives to be 30 is doing it wrong, or he's in the wrong job. Hussars were the dash and cut with the big moustache and the fancy headgear and the police there. Police, not police. A police is a very tight jacket. It could actually be worn. Light infantry also had polices, especially in the British Army. The British made much more use of infantry polices, the French not so much. And even then was select officers. But the police would be worn about the left shoulder. And on impromptu, I had no idea I was going to talk about this. So the police would be worn with a cord running from around the neck sort of area, sometimes under the arm, sometimes over. And the police would be worn like this, loose. Your arm would be free to do what you like. And the idea of the police would be that it would impede saber cuts to this side of the body. I'm not sure how, maybe it was just a thing they did, but having more stuff between the sword and your body is always a good idea. And so the police was a key part of the hussar uniform. Now, why did I mention hussars? Well, the British Army did not have hussars until I believe 1806 or 1808, again, memory. They had light dragoons, and dragoons were no longer infantry troops. By this period, dragoons are cavalry. So light dragoons, heavy dragoons, light cavalry, heavy cavalry. But the British then decided to change to hussars. And hussars were much, much more expensive troops to outfit than light dragoons. Because a hussar is much more expensive to outfit and to maintain than a dragoon. But hussars were the thing to do. They were the dash and cut sort of aristocratic, well, not aristocratic, but they were the ladies' men of the army. They were the poster boys of the cavalry type deal. So yeah, so that's when the book actually has a whole system of campaigning where you actually have to pay for and equip your own troops. And hussars are no much better than any real other types of cavalry. That was a horrendously worded sentence, but I think you understood what I meant. Hussars were much more expensive, but hussars were the image of the Napoleonic period. After the Napoleonic period, uniforms get dull. The uniforms get a lot more plain, I guess you could say. They lose that panache of the Napoleonic period. They lose the just over the top abundance of gold braid, and they really become a lot less opulent. And I think that might have something to do with the lack of wargaming interest for these sort of periods in the mainstream wargaming society. Is that it's very dull. The Russians in the Crimea are just wearing greatcoats with pickelhaube type helmets. You know, it's you look at the Napoleonic Wars, they're wearing these giant shakos. That's a Russian grenadier. Look at that. Look at this. Look at this. And now look at this. This. Just a shako with this phallic big plume on the top of it. This monstrous. And then you have this is British cavalry in the Crimean War. These are the British cavalry in the Napoleonic War. The British do not have lancers for the Napoleonic Wars. They don't have lancers. They do in the form of, in India, they have lancers. They have company lancers. The company is, of course, the, what's it called? The Surka, I believe is the native sort of word for the company. company employs company lancers and they employ native lancers. The British Army doesn't. And company troops don't serve outside India anyway. So thank you for watching. This is currently a 55-minute recording, which is as much as my SD card can hold. So I'm not sure how long the video is actually going to be. I just kept rambling until the SD card filled up. So thank your patience, and just be glad that I didn't have a bigger SD card than a 16 gigabyte. Just be very thankful for that. I will have a better system of rambling my way through this book. And I'm going to probably just do this with a whole bunch of books. I might grab I have behind me here, I have the Empire in Flames, which is the bolt action supplement for specifically the Americans in the Pacific. There is some Australian stuff in here as well. It's mostly Americans. There is actually a dedicated Australian book, if memory serves. Blood and Plunder. I might just grab a few books I have lying around, especially ones related to wargaming, and just flick through and just talk, because frankly it's much easier than actually researching videos. So thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful day. I'm off to research the other Battle of Thermopylae. Stay tuned for that, and if anybody has any recommendations, stick them down in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching.